What'd
just
you do
looking at
this time?
I was just looking at the football lineups that I have built and realized that I had accidentally selected the NBA slate in
Oh,
the Sims tool.
I actually just did the exact same thing. I was looking at NBA stuff. I was like, why did I pull up NBA stuff?
What's next? You're gonna have the same shirt on?
Yeah, that'd be crazy.
What is happening, everybody? It is Saturday afternoon. I know the last couple of weeks, Neil Orfield and I, what do? We ended up doing Saturday live before lock shows because there was, Saturday slates, but that's not really what we have today. There is a one-off Saturday game. We're going to be covering the main slate on Sunday again. And if you guys can do us favors, you come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are sponsored by DraftKings Rainmakers. If you guys haven't checked out Rainmakers, claim your free starters pack by clicking on the link below. But yeah, Neil, it's been a couple of weeks since we did the normal tournament strategy show that you and I do. And this is what I consider to be the last real week of the NFL DFS season because, week 18 has a whole bunch of weirdness to it. And I really do love the playoff slates, but it's a totally different animal than playing, some of the regular season slates where you've got, this week, 13 games to choose from. Sometimes other, the way the playoffs are broken up this year, it's going to be like Saturday games, Sunday games, Monday games. It's going to be much more spread out. So this is really our last chance to be playing any kind of normal NFL slate. But don't worry, for the playoffs, we are going to have everything covered here on Stokast. And there actually is really good value signing up at our tools for the playoffs because of the way the games are spread out. Like, you're getting so many different slates and so many different showdowns, all which are covered in the Sims tool and the data and all of that. But Neil, what is your mindset heading into a 13-game week 17 slate?
Just real disappointment to not have a single team in a championship anywhere that I can cheer for. But no, it is a really fun slate, to be honest. Just looking at all the games on the slate, there are some massive totals. Like we've had some weeks recently where we have like one or two games that has a high total and everything else is like, 42 or lower. We have a lot of teams with really high implied totals this week. So should be a really fun slate, figuring out which of those teams we want to play.
Yeah, and we do have some people here who are asking us. They want us to talk about the Lions-Cowboys game. How about this? At the end, after Neil and I do the normal show where we go through everything, we'll have Mike, I'm giving you an assignment. At the end of the show, after we finish talking about the Week 17 slate, we'll run a sim for tonight's slate, and then we'll just pull it up on screen. We'll look at some of the results. I think that's a good way to cover it because we're not going to be doing like a full hour on tonight's game. But we could certainly hit on it at the end, especially if that is something that you guys are asking for in the chat. So no issue with that whatsoever. Just the only thing I'll ask you is to do us a favor by liking the video and subscribing to the YouTube channel.
I would also add, Greg, I just recorded before this. I recorded my lineup generator VOD for week 17, and I did include right at the end. I just looked real quickly at a few lineups for tonight's slate. So if you want to check that out, that's another place you can see that we covered Lions Cowboys just a little bit.
Yeah, and then I'll probably do something for the Sims. How about this? Also, after this ends, I'll run some lineups through the Sims on my own, and then I'll post something to Twitter after this as well. So we'll make sure that we get everything covered for you guys if you're looking for information for tonight's slate as well. But let's start by looking at this weekend slate, the main slate, week 17, Neil, and we've got a 13-game slate. We haven't seen a 13-game slate in a meaningful time since before teams were on the buys and whatnot. What is the way that you see a lot of your lineups being built for this week if it changes from any other week? I know for me, having run lineups through the Sims both today and yesterday, I'm getting to some builds that I didn't really think I was going to. I'll explain more in a second when we start talking about quarterbacks. But for you, Neil, are there any like big picture takeaways you have for this slate?
I think I'm going to be concentrated to a few teams. Like there are a few teams that are just in great spots on this slate, or a few game environments that I really like. But I'm going to be mixing and matching. Like there are several spots where I like both the run game and the passing game. So like the Eagles, I'm going to have some that are just straight up Jalen Hurts passing attack stacks. And then I'm going to have some DeAndre Swift in some of my other lineups. Same thing with the 49ers. I'm going to do some Purdy stacks. Obviously going to have some Christian McCaffrey, some independent of those Purdy stacks. Also going to have some stacks with Purdy, with Christian McCaffrey. It is tough just because we do have, and then we've got the Rams against the Giants. I feel like that's going to be a great spot for both the passing game and the running game. We have several of those spots on this slate where I feel like, I kind of want to play the quarterback there, but then also the running back is also in a great spot. And then we do have actually a few spots also where it is, pass funnel spots with the Houston, Tennessee game. I feel like I'm going to play those passing attacks, maybe not going to play the running game there as much. So Yeah, I'm going to be, I think, concentrated to a few game environments, but not really concentrated within those of like these specific plays I'm playing within those game environments this week.
Yeah, so for me, and this could lead right into us talking about the quarterbacks, this is as concentrated as I've been on the stud quarterbacks on any slate for the entire year. And there's certainly some correlation to that with what you just said, Neil, where there's some individual spots that you want to focus on. And it does really stand out if you look at the top stacks, which I know is something that you like to look at from our data over at Stochastic. And you'll see like Jalen Hurts, Brock Purdy, talking, the Eagles and the 49ers, as teams that have really high top stack odds relative to all the other teams that we have on the slate. So I look at the quarterbacks that I have double-digit exposure to, Neil, and there's only 4 of them across DraftKings and FanDuel. Can you guess who they are? It won't be that hard to figure out if you look at the top stacks tool, and you keep in mind that we're talking about the studs on the slate. Only 4 that I'm really building around, and then there is one cheaper quarterback who I actually am getting to in some lineups as well. But 4 studs that are making up the majority of my stacks. Want to guess who they are?
I mean, definitely Jalen Hurts.
Yep.
4 studs. All right, that's interesting. Brock Purdy, does he qualify as a stud?
I think he has to. He was somebody
he was the MVP favorite until last week.
He was like a minus 400 favorite to win the MVP last week. He is a terrible game, and just the market went completely nuts, which there is kind of a funny thing that could end up happening from this, that I tweeted about this as well. So we had Jalen Hurts was the MVP favorite. They play the 49ers. The 49ers win. Brock Purdy becomes the MVP favorite. And then what happens? Brock Purdy last week has a bad game against the Ravens. The Ravens win. Lamar Jackson is now the MVP favorite. Do you know who the Ravens are playing this weekend now, Neil?
I do. I mean, that should be a fun game. This is one that we were all building for all best ball summer. Ravens Dolphins. I mean, that's a fun game.
So Ravens Dolphins. So what happens if the Dolphins win? I assume that Tua becomes the MVP favorite over Lamar Jackson. And then what happens in the final week of the season? It's going to be Bills Dolphins playing potentially for the AFC East. And so then do we just have this like transitive MVP handoff? Because there is a scenario where we go from Jalen Hurts loses to the 49ers, Brock Purdy becomes the MVP favorite over Jalen Hurts. Then you could get Lamar Jackson becomes the MVP favorite after beating the 49ers and Brock Purdy. Tua could become the MVP favorite after beating Brock Purdy and the Tua could become the MVP favorite after beating Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. And then the final week of the season, if the Bills beat the Dolphins, then potentially Josh Allen becomes the betting favorite to win MVP. So just like very weird the way that the MVP favorite has been passed off like that. But at least as far as this slate goes, the point being is like, yeah, I'm going to include Brock Purdy as a stud at this point. I know he sucked last week, and he's become like a lightning rod for takes on Twitter in kind of a weird way, because he's clearly been very good this year. And at least from a fantasy standpoint, like, yeah, we have to consider him as a stud. So yeah, Jalen Hurts, Brock Purdy are 2 of them.
I embarrassed myself on Christmas with my brother-in-law, telling him, because he was saying, well, Brock Purdy, and he's, probably there are 20 NFL quarterbacks who would be just as good or better than Purdy in that spot. And I was like, no, I think that he's actually been pretty good. He's made some really good throws. I think that it's legit. Like, he seems to be an actual good quarterback. And then he goes out and throws 4 interceptions that very same night. So thanks a lot, Brock Purdy. All right. Outside of those 2, I'm going to go with Lamar Jackson.
Correct.
And then the 4th one, again, what qualifies as a stud here? I'm going to go with Matthew Stafford.
Patrick Mahomes. Clearly, okay. I think should be in the stud category, even if also the Chiefs have been leaving a little bit wanting and had that awful game against the Raiders last week. The Raiders 2 defensive touchdowns in a span of like 10 seconds or something like that, back-to-back plays where we saw the Raiders score defensive touchdowns against the Kansas City Chiefs. So yeah, that's my quarterback exposure, Neil. Primarily Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy, Jalen Hurts. My most rostered quarterback who isn't one of the studs, I'm just under 10% on both DraftKings and FanDuel, of Tyrod Taylor. And this is one with minimal confidence, Taylor. He also is picking up some ownership from the field. So I'm somewhere around even with him, where we've got him projected also for just under 10% ownership here. But the big thing with Tyrod Taylor is just that he has so much rushing upside. He's also relatively cheap. His stacking options also cheap. So it's easy to fit them into lineups as just a value standpoint, that he gets studs around them. But I like the studs at QB this week, Neil. How about yourself?
Yeah, I like the studs at QB this week too. And I like all 4 that you mentioned. They're definitely going to be parts of my approach this weekend. I think so this is one that I was not like early in the week. My cousin brought up the idea of playing Josh Allen. He's playing in some like NFT tournament, whatever. And he put Josh Allen into his lineup. But I was like, I don't really love the matchup with the Patriots. Like, I feel like there's so many good spots here. They don't really need to go to Josh Allen. And he's like, yeah, but they need to win. Like, they're going to be, going all out trying to win this game. And the Patriots are also kind of, I think, in tank mode at this point. And then I look at it this morning, I'm like, oh, the Bills actually have a 27 implied total. So now I'm like, he's probably right. I should probably actually, like, I want to just write off Josh Allen because all the other studs look so good. They're in such great spots. And I'm like, all right, I just want to throw out the guy who's in the bad game environment. But it turns out it's not as bad as I was expecting. And we actually have really nice positive leverage in the top stacks tool. 3.6% ownership going to Josh Allen, 5.3% chance of being the top stack. So I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to go to a little bit of Josh Allen this week as well. I think I'd throw him into, as much as I'd love to just like, we're going to play these studs, throw these ones out. I think that it kind of makes sense to me to play some Josh Allen stacks here. So I think I'm going to try that here or there. Little bit interesting, Kyler, just because same game environment, obviously, as Jalen Hurts, and the Eagles have been a little bit of a pass funnel. I think Kyler, still has some talent there. So I have some interest. It's an interesting spot. We obviously have, you can go just to Trey McBride. Then do we throw in Michael Wilson? Do we want to play any Rondell Moore, Greg Dortch with Kyler Brown out? I don't know, but I think pretty inexpensive pass catching options there with Kyler. So I kind of like the idea of that stack. And then, as I mentioned, I think you can play some CJ Stroud returning this week against the pass funnel Tennessee defense. I have some interest in. I think that's it for me. Oh, actually, one more. Justin Fields. I think Atlanta has been pretty bad against the pass. I think that I will have some exposure to Justin Fields also, but then no other quarterbacks beyond those.
And then to add on top of me mostly getting to the stud quarterbacks, I have to say also that of those stud quarterbacks, I've got Jalen Hurts showing up in about 30% of my lineups on DraftKings and FanDuel. So he's somebody who, and also this is something that's echoed in the top stacks tool. If you look at, we've got the Eagles on DraftKings with a 21.1% chance to be the top scoring team of the entire slate, a little bit lower on FanDuel, 14.5%. But still, that is enough for Jalen Hurts to be by far my most rostered quarterback of all those studs, showing up in about a third of my lineup. So that's how I'm looking at the QBs this week, looking at a lot of the studs, paying up for some of my stacks. And one of the reasons that's doable, Neil, as we transition to the running backs here, is there are cheap running backs to be interested in. Now, we do have a wrench that was thrown into this because yesterday, when I was building lineups, I'm getting to just all of the CEH. If you guys watched the sim show that Lofty and I did yesterday, we were getting CEH was popping up in just about everything. Pacheco not expected to play. McKinnon, he's out as well. So it looks like we've got a guy here, and we already like Patrick Mahomes as a quarterback. So we like the Chiefs offense, at least our data does. And then CEH kind of falls into that as a piece to get to. But then what happens? CEH is downgraded to questionable yesterday because he is dealing with an illness. So as of right now, he's expected to be chalk. Our data projects him to be good chalk. But Neil, is he live to actually end up sitting out on Sunday, or do you think he'll be fine by the time that tomorrow rolls around?
I have no idea. I'd say yes, he is live to end up sitting. I don't have any better information than what is public. I will say though, we did just see that the Chiefs just called up practice squad player Keontae Ingram, running back, which maybe makes it seem a little bit more likely that definitely, at least we have to consider that CEH might miss, and maybe Keontae Ingram is the running back that we'll need for the Chiefs this week. That just happened 8 minutes ago. I'm seeing that we had the Chiefs posted that they called up Keontae Ingram from the practice squad. So to me, that maybe makes me lean more towards CEH. Like there's real doubt here, like that he might actually sit. Regardless, we're going to have a cheap running back option from the Chiefs in a great spot here, whether it's CEH or Keontae Ingram. If CEH is in, I think I'm just going to play CEH probably. But if he's out, we're going to have to consider Keontae Ingram also.
Yeah, and I was just looking too to see what the price point was of Ingram, or if he's even in the player pool. So I do see that we have him in the DraftKings player pool priced at 4K. Now I'm pulling up the FanDuel one to make sure that he is in there as well. And he is. He's $4,200 on FanDuel. So we'll see what ends up happening with Ingram, and our data and projections will all be updated when we have more information. We just don't have it right now. If you guys are looking to sign up for any package here at Stokastic, use one of the links we have below and you could sign up. If you want to sign up for the lineup generator package, that is the most affordable package that we have over at Stokastic, less than $15 to get access to all of the Showdown slates. And then also you're going to be getting main slates in there as well. So going to be really, really useful come playoff time. Going to get lots of slates in there. So you could sign up for that using the link below. Also comes with access to Discord, or if you want to sign up for one of the Stokastic data packages that comes with a contest generator, comes with the Sims tool, you could also sign up for that. using the link that we have below. But Neil, looking at the running backs, and I agree with you, Keontae Ingram should CEH be rolled out. Like, he just kind of has to be the guy by default, I assume, for the Chiefs. At 4K on DK, 4,200 on FanDuel, he would have to be one of our most rostered players on the entire slate, would he not?
Yeah, against this Bengals defense, I mean, they've been awful against the run. Yeah, whoever is starting at running back for the Chiefs is going to be interesting. I just saw somebody said it's going to be a pass-heavy approach for the Chiefs, so there's going to be 9 wide receiver drops. Yeah, so at Brad Moore, that's probably accurate. They're just going to throw it and drop it all game, but they should probably run it a little bit. And yeah, regardless of who is starting for the Chiefs, they're going to look great. This is as good of a spot as possible. I would expect them to have a heavy workload, and they are cheap. So yeah, whether it's CEH or Keontae Ingram, I think they're going to be a priority tomorrow. Obviously depends somewhat on where ownership ends up. Like if we end up having 50% going to Keontae Ingram, then maybe I'll start thinking about the fade there. But yeah, I think whoever is starting at running back for the Chiefs is going to be cheap and in a great spot.
Yeah, so right now, CEH, somebody would get to in a good amount of last. Currently my most rostered running back if I was entering lineups right now, but Keontae Ingram probably takes that mantle should we end up seeing CEH not play tomorrow. But let's talk about now some of the stud running backs, Neil, which obviously is going to include the likes of Christian McCaffrey this week, who just has a massive projection for us. We have him projected for 28.23 fantasy points. I think this is maybe there was a Tyreek Hill week earlier in the year that was kind of close to this, but off the top of my head, like this is the highest I can remember any player that we've had projected this year. So with that being in mind, how much are you going to prioritize getting to Christian McCaffrey this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, quite a bit. I mean, so we have him at 30.5% ownership. So I say quite a bit, and then I'm like, but I'm probably going to be underweight to the field. Like I don't think I'm going to have 30% Christian McCaffrey, just because we do have a number of other running backs that I really like as well. And Christian McCaffrey is 9,600, and obviously the Niners can do it through the air. A lot of different ways for them to get there. So really love Christian McCaffrey. Like it makes sense that he has, as you say, like maybe the highest projection we've ever seen. But with that price tag and that ownership, and the fact that it could just be a complete blowout, I think I'll probably end up underweight to 30% ownership. And that's also partially driven by obviously the boom bust rule. We have him optimal 25% of the time. So we have a little bit of negative leverage on Christian McCaffrey. If I have 9,600 left over in a lineup, I'm not going anywhere else. Like Christian McCaffrey is the number one player I want in my lineups, but he is so expensive that I think I'm probably going to be underweight to the field, just because there are a lot of other players that I think look great on this slate, and there's a lot of ownership going there. What are you doing with McCaffrey?
Yeah, so I'm right around even with the field on McCaffrey. He showed up in 32% of the lineups that I built before the show started here. So, no real difference from the field. He also shows up in a lot of my Purdy stacks, which I also don't have an issue with. There's a lot of running backs. Like I probably wouldn't want, like Derrick Henry in a Titan stack, but Christian McCaffrey, considering his involvement in the passing game, and that he is certainly somebody who could break off, a 70-yard screen touchdown or something like that. I think that he is viable to stack with Purdy. So I'm around even with the field on Christian McCaffrey. Now, with that said, Neil, there is a pivot that I really do like on the high end as a lower-owned running back who is currently showing up as my 4th most rostered running back. So my 4 running backs that I'm getting to the most of this weekend, at least as of now. CEH, we've talked about that situation. Christian McCaffrey is one of them. Zamir White, who we'll talk more about in a little bit. And then as a contrarian running back, Neil, Saquon Barkley. Barkley is somebody who plays a ton for the Giants. We've seen games where he gets there from a fantasy standpoint by averaging like 3 yards per carry, just because he'll have a game like he did against the Buffalo Bills. Was that like a month and a half ago or something? Just, by the way, a game that Tyrod Taylor started at quarterback, where we will see Saquon Barkley carry the ball 30 plus times. He gets involvement in the passing game as well. And we've seen that happen with Tyrod Taylor as the QB. So I think that Barkley is somebody who's really going overlooked on the slate. He is projected for modest ownership around 10%. He is going to be expensive. But with that said, I think it's warranted considering the workload that we've seen from in other games with Tyrod Taylor starting at QB. So Barkley as a low-owned pay-up option is a pivot off of McCaffrey.
Yeah, honestly, that's not where I thought you were going. I thought you were going to bring up Kyren Williams. But yeah, Barkley, we last week, 23 rushing attempts, 6 targets for Barkley. Decent enough matchup. Like it's not the best matchup in the world against the Rams. The Giants only have an 18.75 implied team total, so that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. But he just gets so much volume, and clearly the talent is still there with Saquon Barkley. So yeah, I think that does make some sense as well.
Yeah, so Barkley, that is my pivot. if I'm going to be paying up in the high end and getting away from Christian McCaffrey. But how about you? Is it Kyren Williams for you, or maybe is it nobody on high? Maybe like the mid range a little bit more.
I think it is Kyren Williams for me after Christian McCaffrey. Kyren Williams has been so good. He gets so much volume. Nice spot against the Giants. They might not need to be passing the whole game. So I think it is Kyren as my second favorite pay up option. He's also the second most expensive running back on the slate. We only have 9% ownership going to Kyren. 7% chance being optimal. So we actually have some negative leverage there on Kyren, but I still think I'm willing to go there just because of the volume. I think he's shown more talent than I thought he had coming into the year, and the matchup is great for Kyren Williams. So I do think he is my second favorite pay up option.
Yeah, so for me, it's Barkley. For you, it's going to be Kyren. Both of them relatively contrarian, especially compared to Christian McCaffrey. And once we get into the mid range, I think that Zamir White, really hard to not consider him. And he's somebody who, if you remember last year, there was people who prior to the year, considering the draft capital that the Raiders had paid to get Zamir White, there was a lot of people in best ball, particularly, who were taking Zamir White at like not necessarily the end of the draft, but like using actual draft capital on thinking he was going to end up taking over for Jacobs as the starting running back for the Raiders. Now, it didn't happen last year. It hasn't happened this year either. But all of a sudden now Jacobs banged up towards the tail end of the season. And now Zamir White is in the role that a lot of people thought he was going to have prior to his rookie year. So Zamir White, considering the workload that he got last week against the Chiefs, which maybe could have even been more in hindsight, because don't forget, the Raiders had 2 defensive touchdowns, which did keep the offense off the field a little bit. So Zamir White, also somebody who just based on volume, he's going to be popular, not like insanely popular or anything this weekend, but he is a chalky-ish option that I think is warranted.
Yeah, 5,100. The price is right for Zamir White. I'm with you. I think he's going to get a decent amount of ownership. I don't know if you saw on Twitter, Greg, but Zamir White, his 62 yards after the game was basically wrapped up, knocked me out of the one final I thought I was going to make for best ball. So I kind of hate Zamir White, especially because I was one of the people who drafted a lot of him last year. Also this year, because Josh Jacobs looked like he might be holding out. So I was drafting a lot of Zamir White this year. He didn't do anything for me in all those weeks. He didn't really do anything until finally I didn't have him on any teams. And then he knocked me out. So I kind of hate Zamir White right now, but I do think I'm with you. I think that he looks like a good play this week at 5,100 against the Colts. They are 24th against the run in terms of DVOA this year. Looks like a great spot for Zamir White. So yeah, looks like another one of those cheaper options that you can go to. That I just looking at the all the different various options on the slate at various price points, you can see why I'm not going to get to a ton of Christian McCaffrey. I'm going to be underweight to the field, just because there are so many running backs that I think make a lot of sense on this slate. Zamir White obviously being one of them. We already talked about the Chiefs running backs, but even like the true mid range. So I told you I like McCaffrey, I like Kyren Williams, but even like right behind, can I really write off Rachaad White? He's just been so consistent. You get so much volume. One of those guys who's been great basically every week. We've got Travis Etienne going up against the Panthers. Like, that's about as good of a spot as you can ask for. And he's only at 3.5% ownership. So a lot of interest there. There's just so many good running backs on this slate that it's kind of hard for me to take huge stands on any of them. Like I'm still probably going to be concentrated to about 10 running backs total, maybe fewer than 10. So, I'm not going to be really spread out. There's a lot of I'm not going to play. This is one of the rare weeks where I don't think I'm going to play the Miami running backs. I think I'm just going to hope that the Baltimore defense can actually stop Miami and play other spots here. But there's a lot of good running backs on this slate.
Yeah, and the one other running back. So for me, I do have exposure to a lot of running backs, but the guys that I consider to be like the core guys that I'm getting the most exposure to: CEH, Zamir White, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley. The final one is flimsier, but the more I've thought about it, I do think there's a lot of opportunity for Javonte Williams to get volume this weekend, Neil, because let's look at what's going on right now with the Broncos. The entire situation with Russell Wilson, total disaster, but he's benched. He's not going to be playing QB for them. And now, in addition to that, Courtland Sutton's out because of a concussion. Jerry Jeudy is questionable to play, and I would say that his status is pretty iffy as well. This could be a scenario where they're just like, hey, Javonte Williams, you're just going to touch the ball 30 times this weekend. This could be a spot where, and it could go either way also, where with them holding out a bunch of guys, maybe they're going to give, like McLaughlin looks at running back. So it's solely a GPP play, but that's what we're doing here. We're giving out our favorite GPP plays of the slate in the spot where we're trying to win somebody $1 million, just like Neil himself. Neil's won a million maker. Neil's won $1 million. Sometimes you take chances on guys where the floor will kind of put it to the side, because these are tournaments. We care most about upside. And there is a scenario that I think is realistic where the Broncos look at what's available in their offense and they just say, hey, let's just give the ball to Javonte Williams a shit ton this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, last week he had 11 carries and 3 targets, still pretty involved in the offense. It is like obviously you don't love that they still have McLaughlin and Samaje Perine involved, but yeah, they certainly in a spot with their passing game basically dead. Like, why not just hand it to the running backs? Even if they do use all 3 of them, it could be 20 carries for Javonte Williams and still like 6 for Jaleel McLaughlin, 8 for whatever. Like, could be a mix where he still gets a lot of carries even with all 3 running backs involved, and they should be able to do well against this Chargers run defense. So yeah, I think Javonte makes some sense. He's not even one of them that I was considering. And now I'm like, yeah, that you make a good point. He is somebody that I should probably at least consider having in my player pool at 5,600. Nice price tag there for Javonte Williams. I already brought up DeAndre Swift, just talking about like all the games where I'm kind of playing the passing game in some lineups, the running game in some lineups. I think in a matchup against the Cardinals, terrible against both the run and the pass. We saw it last year happen frequently where the Eagles would get off to a big lead in the first half, and then the second half they basically stop throwing. It hasn't really happened as much this year, but I think that it's still the approach that they would take if they get off to a big lead in the first half. So I do like DeAndre Swift at 6,500 against that Cardinals run defense. Basically 7% ownership, 7% optimal right now in the boom bust. So it doesn't really stand out as a great pool. But I do think it makes some sense there. I said there are a lot of running backs that I like, but I feel like we've talked about all of the running backs that I have significant interest in, just because I have a lot of interest in, 5 to 10 running backs.
Yeah, and I mean, I really hit on my core guys at running back as well. Wide receiver, though, which we're going to hit on next, I find it very difficult to be concentrated at wide receiver where we just have so many stud pay up options at wide out on the slate, and guys who are benefiting from injuries as well, because we've got Tyreek Hill with no Jalen Waddle. He's really expensive. If I'm paying up for only one guy on the slate, if I could just choose one, it has to be Christian McCaffrey for me, which is also going to limit some of my ability to pay up for a lot of these stud wide receivers. So there are guys who, starting by talking about the studs here, I have AJ Brown in just over 20% of lineups, 21%. A lot of that's to do with the amount of Jalen Hurts exposure that I get to. But beyond that, I mean, I've got Tyreek Hill, ownership for him in the teams for me. And that's really a lot of my wide receiver exposure. It's like, here are quarterbacks that I've rostered. Here are the wide receivers that they get paired with. And then I get to wide receivers. A lot of these guys ownership in like the mid-teens. So I'm really spread out at wide receiver. But at the high end, Neil, who is your priority? For me, it's AJ Brown, but a lot of it is because of the amount of Jalen Hurts I get to.
For me, it is also AJ Brown, and partially for the same reason. I really like that stack against the Cardinals in a lot of lineups with AJ Brown. I am going to be pairing him with Jalen Hurts. Yeah, it's funny. Tyreek Hill, I've said before that I think I sometimes overvalue matchups, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to play Tyreek Hill against the Ravens, and then I start watching the game, and it's like, oh yeah, he's Tyreek Hill, like he can do it against literally anybody. So I want to write him off because of the matchup, but as you said, no Jalen Waddle. There's still just such a great offense. Can't completely write off Tyreek Hill basically any week. But I'm with you. Like if I'm playing up for just one option, I'm not pivoting from Christian McCaffrey to Tyreek Hill. Christian McCaffrey just similar. Like he's got the talent. He's also got the great matchup this week. So definitely McCaffrey, my favorite pay up option overall. AJ Brown, I think, will be my highest exposed of the pay up options at wide receiver. Still, the Rams guys look great. They are in about as good of a matchup as you can hope for. So I do like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua as well. I mentioned that I have some interest in Josh Allen. In those lineups where I'm playing Josh Allen, I'm probably going to be playing Stephon Diggs also. That's not as much of a priority, to be clear. I don't think I'm going to have the same kind of exposure to the Patriots as I do to AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts, the Eagles stacks, but a little bit of interest there. Yeah, and then of course, like the San Francisco guys, I'm going to play. We talked about we're both playing some Purdy lineups. Obviously, you can play some Debo, some Ayuk, some whichever pass catchers you want to put in there with Brock Purdy. So we do have a number of pretty good pay up options. But I am with you. The top priority for me is going to be AJ Brown.
Yeah. So for me, yeah, AJ Brown on the high end, Tyreek Hill, my next favorite option to get to a wide receiver. And I would like to think like, oh, I would play a ton of Tyreek Hill with Jalen Waddle out, but then it's what's the opportunity cost? And once again, I get exposure to him in the teens. Tyreek Hill, he's projected for ownership in the low teens, so I'm slightly overweight to him. But you just get to a standpoint too, where there's so many wide receivers to consider on this slate. We got Christian McCaffrey that want to play at running back, and it would be great if I had, hey, I've got AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill, and Christian McCaffrey all in the same lineup, but we can't do that. There's a salary cap that we have to consider around here. So AJ Brown, that's going to be my highest priority at wide receiver, followed by Tyreek Hill. I'm currently overweight to each of them. And AJ Brown projected for very low ownership, which I'm kind of surprised by considering the spot that the Eagles offense is in and what we are expecting, at least from an upside standpoint, against the Cardinals this weekend. Any other wide receivers on the high end that you're going to be prioritizing?
I think I've mentioned all. I mean, I do want to. I'm just looking at it closer. I mentioned Cup and Nakua, but we have both under 4% ownership, which is really interesting to me against the Giants. I've said before on the show that I want to try doing the double stack with Cup and Nakua, and I'm not sure that it's hit at all yet this year, but they do. They like still both have so much upside. So I kind of like the idea of trying to force in that double stack with Cup and Nakua in at least a couple lineups to see if they can finally both work out, maybe get that 100-yard bonus in the same week, because they just have such great volume. It's a great spot against the Giants. I might try that one more time, the Cup Nakua double stack. Yeah, I mean, we talked about the San Francisco guys, Debo, whereas Ayuk is down at 7,000. It's funny how that the thinking is kind of flipped. It used to be Ayuk for a while was like very clearly better than Samuel, more involved. Now it feels like it's flipped a little bit. So part of me wants to just be, I'll pay down for 9% owned Brandon Ayuk at 7,000, but I like both Debo and Ayuk. Can't ask for a better matchup than the Commanders. Nico Collins, kind of an interesting pay up to be contrarian against the Titans pass funnel defense. Obviously, if we have interest in AJ Brown, I have some interest in Devontae Smith also. He hasn't been nearly as good when Dallas Goedert is active, and Goedert is active this week. So, if you want to play into that narrative, maybe you can fade and just go to AJ Brown. But Devontae Smith at 3% ownership against this Arizona defense, I'm going to have some interest there as well. We have positive leverage there. I guess Rashee Rice, if you're playing Patrick Mahomes, he's not going to be a huge priority for me, but if I'm playing Patrick Mahomes, I'll probably have some Rashee Rice in there as well. And then, yeah, my Justin Fields lineup, I'll have some DJ Moore. Don't know that I'll go to. Maybe I'll have a little bit of Calvin Ridley just because it is a nice matchup with Carolina. But yeah, I don't think I have that much interest in anybody else.
Yeah, so one thing that I want to hit on that you had brought up there, because Brock Purdy, one of my most rostered quarterbacks, I actually do like Brandon Ayuk more than Debo Samuel this week. And throughout the year, for me, I generally play Ayuk more in my stacks with Purdy than Debo Samuel, because Debo is somebody who, obviously he can take a short pass and he could bring it to the house for a touchdown. We've seen him break off big plays multiple times, but sometimes he does it by carrying the football as well. We've seen long rushing touchdowns from Debo Samuel. So I do think there's more of a correlation between Ayuk and Purdy than there is between Debo and Purdy. And then also, we could expect more of a target share going to Brandon Ayuk. Ayuk has more of a target upside, whereas the way that Debo gets used, like Debo might get 8 touches, but it could be because he gets, 4 passing plays, 4 rushing attempts. So the way that his workload is kind of diversified, I actually don't really view him as much different than like Christian McCaffrey in terms of correlation with Brock Purdy, where I do think of Debo Samuel kind of more as like a running back / wide receiver than just as a pure wide receiver. So I don't really love him quite as much as Brandon Ayuk as a pass catching option with Brock Purdy. And then as far as some of the other wide receivers that I'm prioritizing, Rashee Rice, just because of my current ownership that I have on Patrick Mahomes, Zay Flowers, he's my favorite stacking option with Lamar Jackson. And then if I'm going on the low end for a one-off, Neil, Demario Douglas, I know that the Patriots offense has been absolute dog shit, but when he's healthy, Douglas gets a lot of targets. He's never really priced appropriately for it, and he's projected for some ownership this weekend, but once again, nothing really crazy. And I do think he's one of the better values we have on the slate.
Yeah, I noticed he was popping for me when I ran the lineup generator, getting into a lot of Demario Douglas. Also got a little bit of Devontae Parker, which I thought was kind of interesting, getting those Patriots receivers this week a little bit. Another name that I want to throw out there is Noah Brown. I mean, I just talked about Nico Collins being somebody that I'm interested in paying up to be contrarian for. But Noah Brown, I mean, earlier in the year, he's had some massive games. I don't know that he's had one with Nico Collins. I think that it was usually with Nico Collins out and Tank Dell in, but I think that he's certainly capable of having big games. And I might be wrong about maybe there was one with Nico Collins, but regardless, I think that they are the top 2 receivers for the Texans here. They're in a great spot against the Titans. We get CJ Stroud back. Now we've got CJ. I mean, you have to pay up a little bit for Nico Collins at 7,200. We have Noah Brown at 5,100 and only projected for 2.7% ownership. I think people maybe have kind of forgotten Noah Brown. He's getting lost in the mix a little bit. We have him optimal 7% of the time. So I actually have a lot of interest in Noah Brown in the mid range as well. I don't know that I see any other like major priorities for me. Let me scroll down just a little bit, see that make sure that I'm not missing. Demarcus Robinson, a little bit interesting. We 1.9% ownership. I think he's still been, let me just look at his last week real quick. Yeah, still 91% route participation last week for Demarcus Robinson. So I talk about how much interest I have in Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. Probably the better approach is you should more often be double stacking one of them with Demarcus Robinson just because he is so much cheaper. Of course, last week, 12 targets for Cooper Kupp, 11 for Puka Nacua, 6 to Demarcus Robinson. So to be clear, he's not on the level of those guys, but he is 4,600, a little bit of interest there. I mentioned the Arizona guys. I think I'm going to be taking some shots on primarily Michael Wilson is the Arizona receiver that I have the most interest in, but I might take shots here or there on Rondell Moore or Greg Dortch. I'm not sure that I will, but I might consider them just because I really do like that game environment with the pass funnel Eagles defense. But I think my top priority of those receivers will be Michael Wilson. But yeah, I think that we've basically covered the wide receivers I have the most interest in.
We do have an interesting question in the YouTube chat from Copy Paste Dates. He's asking us, hey, Greg and Neil, I have the Sims tool, but he's wondering what percentage of our entries do we hand build versus using some of the data and tools on the site. So for me, I have not hand built a lineup in forever. I couldn't tell you the exact date the last time I did. So for me personally, and I know that Neil likes to still use stuff like the Boom Bust tool, but use also Optimizer for a lot of your builds, Neil. That's at least my understanding. For me, everything I do is in the Sims tool. That's for NBA, for NFL, for baseball over the summer. I do everything using the Sims tool. For me personally, I haven't hand built a lineup since I don't know, the first George Washington was in office. Sorry, not George Washington. First George Bush was in office. Yeah. It's been a minute for me. So yeah, I use the Sims tool. For me, it's simpler and it saves me time and it gives me better lineups. But for you, Neil, do you ever hand build lineups still?
I do actually. Usually if I play a single entry higher stakes lineup, I will hand build it, and I'll use the Boom Bust tool for that. So I'll just like look at what looks good in the Boom Bust tool, the top stack tool to kind of guide me. I think I play enough off the wall players that I like to, I sometimes use an optimizer. I sometimes use the Sims. Honestly, I think that I probably use more of the tools than anybody at the site just because I do a mix of just, I'm going to hand build. I'm going to use the Boom Bust and the top stacks tool when I'm hand building. I do use the Sims pretty frequently. But then, yeah, as you said, sometimes there are some sites where I'm just like, yeah, there are enough plays that I like that are off the wall that are not going to get much exposure that I'd rather just, it's easier for me to build with an optimizer. So I honestly take advantage of all of the tools in different ways. I'd say I use the Sims probably about 50% of my lineups. And then, but ultimately, yeah, I hand build probably mostly just my, like, if I'm playing a single entry lineup for $50 or more entry fee, I'm usually hand building.
Yeah, and Sean Miller in the chat was saying that he finds hand building fun. Hey, I understand some people like it. I don't. To me, it's very time consuming. Also, I mean, for like NBA slates, I'm playing 150 max for a lot of days. Like, how am I going to hand build 150 NBA lineups? And like news breaks. I mean, yesterday we get news that's breaking, like constantly, like minutes before the game starts. And then the other thing too is like for me running lineups through the Sims and all that, I've been incredibly profitable this year. So I wouldn't really want to change anything with that. I've won a handful of NBA GPPs this year, and then football didn't win a million or anything like that, but I certainly did come close over the course of the year. And it helps me build out what I'm going to be giving out later in the day, how you and I always finish this show, Neil, is our favorite stack of the entire slate. But let's talk about some of the tight ends now. So what we're going to do next is we're going to do tight ends. And then after Neil and I talk about our favorite tight ends, we're going to do our favorite stack of the week. And then we'll look at some lineups for the Saturday night showdown, because some people were asking about that, which I totally understand why. So I want to make sure we cover that as well. But tight ends, Neil, what are you prioritizing as far as tight ends are considered?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the players you'd expect. I think I'm largely paying up at tight end. Travis Kelce is somebody that I played a lot of him last week. I keep going back there, and maybe he is just dust at this point. He keeps letting me down, but 15.6% ownership, great spot. I think I'm going to play a good amount of Travis Kelce. Trey McBride, I think, once again, probably my favorite, or one of my favorite tight ends on the slate. Just a great spot, as it'll be the run back in a lot of Eagles lineups. As I said, I have some interest in playing some Kyler. I think that I'll have some just straight up Arizona stacks with Trey McBride and or Michael Wilson. So I do like Trey McBride. I actually have a lot of interest in Dallas Goedert. I mean, we talked about those Eagle stacks. Dallas Goedert only 4,800, also in that great spot with the Cardinals defense. We've got some nice positive leverage there on Goddard. I don't know that I'm playing any. Maybe it's a mistake that I'm not really considering Trevor Lawrence. Like we talked about not playing there. I'm like, they're playing the Panthers in a game that they're gonna need
Lawrence
to
is out.
win. Oh, you're right. Okay.
Yeah. We got a CJ Beathard at keeper.
Yes.
Beathard played fairly well when we saw him. It was a Monday night game again. I'm pretty sure Monday night game against the Bengals. It had like a pretty low total. And it was a game where Trevor Lawrence got hurt. That was the game where it took him forever to walk to the locker room because he refused to take the cart. And then it was Beathard versus Jake Browning, which, I mean, who was expecting anything from that? It was like one of the best quarterback plays we've seen in any game of the entire season. So as far as CJ Beathard, not somebody I'm considering because there's so many good quarterbacks on the slate, but he is somebody who's played serviceably when he stepped in this season.
Yeah, it was good reminder. I was thinking, man, I'm kind of liking these Jaguars options, but they are, I'm probably not playing Beathard, and that probably makes me a little bit less interested in playing an Evan Ingram or a Calvin Ridley here. So probably not going there a ton. George Kittle, again, just I think a lot of the time we talk about this all the time. Often I'm pairing my tight end with my quarterback or as a run back, and I think that's going to be the case this week also. Travis Kelce, I'm playing in a lot of Patrick Mahomes lineups. Trey McBride, a lot of Jalen Hurts and or I should say Kyler Murray lineups. Dallas Goedert, same thing. George Kittle with Brock Purdy. So I think it will be a similar thing where I'm just going to be pairing my quarterback with my tight end. Dalton Schultz, actually, another one that I hadn't really thought about earlier, but now I'm thinking I'm probably going to play some CJ Stroud lineups against this Titans defense. Dalton Schultz at 4,300, another cheap way to get exposure to that Houston stack. So I do have some interest there. Maybe some Isaiah Likely. We talk about that. That's a nice game environment for the Ravens. Miami has been a lot better on defense in recent weeks, specifically pass defense. So it's not a great spot for Isaiah Likely, but he's 4,600 and does basically have the Mark Andrews role. So I do have some interest in Isaiah Likely. I think that's about it for me as far as like the biggest interest for me. Any other tight ends that you really like?
Yeah, so for me, a tight end, I'm super spread out this week. One thing that's nice is building lineups this morning. I wasn't getting to quite as much Gerald Everett as what we were getting to yesterday when Lofty and I did the Sim show. So Gerald Everett is somebody who is still in my player pool, but not quite at the same crazy levels yesterday, where he was in like nearly half my lineups. But Gerald Everett is somebody who is at least in play because it seems like Easton Stick has some sort of comfort with him, which we see very frequently with inexperienced quarterbacks is they'll dump the ball off to tight ends a lot. They'll dump the ball off to running backs a lot. So Gerald Everett is somebody on the lower end that I do think is viable. And the rest of it is just who correlates with my game stacks or my QBs. So you got somebody like Travis Kelce, right? I'm getting to a lot of Patrick Mahomes. Therefore, I'm going to be getting to Travis Kelce in lineups with Mahomes. Like my Mahomes stacks, it's Mahomes, and then the pass catchers are basically either Travis Kelce or Rashee Rice. I don't get to anybody else from the Chiefs. Trey McBride, who is getting used as a run back a lot in my Eagles stacks, where I'm getting Trey McBride on the other side of that game. So my exposure to Jalen Hurts brings up my exposure to Trey McBride. Same goes for Dallas Goedert as a stacking option with Jalen Hurts. And then George Kittle is in a handful of my lineups that include Brock Purdy. But that's kind of what I'm looking at here. I'm super spread at a tight end. I have exposure to like 14 tight ends right now in this Sims across my lineups.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm fairly spread out. I mean, I think I named all of the tight ends that I have the most interest in, but similar in that I think we're playing tight ends that are part of our game stacks, essentially.
And we do have a question in here from, where was it? Marquee Music Group. Marquee Music Group. So when you say Sims, is that the lineup generator? No, so those are different things. So the lineup generator, which by the way is still based on simulations, but the lineup generator, so the lineup generator package, if you sign up at Stochastic, we got the lineup generator for less than $15. And that simply builds lineups for you. Now, there's other data involved in there as well that you could see. So if you wanted to swap out a player that maybe you don't like as much, you could swap them, and you'll see all of our player projections and player ownership. So you could do that as well, where you could sort through the players, see what our projections and ownership projections are. But the lineup generator, completely different than what the Sims are. What the Sims are, which is what Mike has been showing. Well, now the lineup generator is on screen right now. But what Mike has also been showing over the course of the show is our Sims tool, which that is the contest generator, which is going to build you a pool of lineups that's supposed to mimic what the field is expected to do. And those lineups all play against each other. It gets simulated 40,000 times, the slate, which Mike now has on screen right here. And that's what the simulation is. It's that contest simulation when all the lineups that are built in the contest generator play against each other 40,000 times. And then from that, we look at the simulated ROI to sort those lineups, to figure out like, okay, which lineups are actually expected to be most profitable. Because if you're building lineups just based on projections and nothing else being considered, like ownership or the players who are in that lineup, it's why just fantasy point projections on their own isn't necessarily the best way to build the most profitable lineup. So that's the difference between the Sims and the lineup generator. And it's for different types of players, right? So for me, I couldn't 150 max and use the lineup generator, for instance. But if you're somebody who's playing, like 10 to 20 lineups, or maybe even just one or two lineups, I think the lineup generator is probably the perfect tool for somebody like that. And once again, there's a link for it below to go and sign up. Neil, anything else you have to add at tight end? If not, we could hit on our favorite stack of the week.
Before I just want to answer Augustine's question, because he also says using the sim tool for the first time and 150 entry, seeing 85 to 90% exposure on CEH and Douglas. What's the best way to fade some of that when down selecting your favorite 150? I just use the boost ROI. You can negatively boost players in that as well. So I would use the boost ROI. And for me, I do everything incrementally. So I'll boost down, 10% to start. I mean, it's usually going to be more like 30% if you're getting to that much of a player. But I do it incrementally, because if you're seeing 85 to 90% exposure to those players, they're probably good players. So you're going to want to have some exposure to. You don't want to get rid of all of that, but maybe incrementally negatively boost their ROI until you have the exposures you like. And that's the same way I do. Like if there's a player that I like more than what the Sims are giving me, I'll positively boost them. So that is my approach to getting more or less of players in my portfolio.
Yeah. And yeah, that's the way a lot of people will go into the contest generator and they'll take a player out, or they'll up to arrow them down. Arrow them. You shouldn't do that. The way you should do it is in the ROI boost. And what you could do is go in and let's see, who was the person who asked the question again? I'm trying to find it.
I was just reading it. Augustine.
Okay. Yeah. So Augustine, and one thing you could also do is hit me up on Twitter, or if you're in Discord, message me on Discord and I can help you with this as well. But go do an ROI boost, and you could start by doing hey, negative ROI boost, 30%, let's say, of Demario Douglas. And then you want to unfavor your top 150 lineups. You refavorite the top 150. Then you can go back and see all right, I had maybe 60% Demario Douglas. Now it's 40%. And if that's still a number you want less of, then do a more aggressive negative ROI boost for him. So that is what I think is the best way to go about doing it. And then copy paste dates was asking us, how do we know what percentage to ROI boost? Yeah, so it's always going to be different on slate to slate and also sport to sport. So, if you're doing an ROI boost for a showdown slate where there's just less options, it's going to be way more dramatic if you do a significant ROI downgrade boost to somebody. So what percentage? It's more like trial and error. And it's also then what your comfort level is, because let's say you've built lineups to get to Mario Douglas and 60% of lineups, maybe in your head, you might just say hey, I only want 30% of them. Well, then you could just keep doing incremental negative ROI boost until you get the number you want. There's not one number that it's the proper number to do is 30 or 40%. It's just until you get the percentage of player that you feel comfortable with, that you determine that's the amount of it that you want. So I hope that helps you guys with some of the questions you might have in there. And also, if you haven't done it, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Neil, what's your favorite stack of the week? If you're only building one lineup in a large field tournament or a single entry for week 17, what would be the quarterback and the pass catchers you go with in that lineup?
Man, there's so many that I like. All right, let's see. I think I'm just going to go with Purdy to Ayuk and Kittle.
Okay. I don't mind that. That's one. I've got double-digit exposure to Purdy, Ayuk, and Kittle, so I have no issue with that whatsoever. Boy, I'm stuck between a couple of these right now.
I feel like I always I never choose the obvious one, and usually sometimes you will choose it, but you've been so good at just picking different stacks that are not the obvious one. Obviously, the first place that I thought, well, I'll let you choose your stack before we.
Yeah, so the one I have the most exposure to is Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown. Like that's my most rostered stack. But there is a part of me that looks at the outlook of the slate, and I do get a good amount of Patrick Mahomes. And I wonder if people are just going to jump ship here on the Chiefs. If people are just so sour on how shitty this Chiefs team has looked recently, they're going to go like, "Yeah, they can't score against the Raiders. They can't score against anybody." So I think this is a good buy low spot. There's a tremendous amount of variance in football. Things change week to week, and people overreact, especially this year. And it's probably been the case all years, although it feels more pronounced this year because there have been more inconsistencies with teams. But it seems like on Twitter, we see like 3 or 4 teams get written off as a fraud every single week. Everybody gets written off constantly as a fraud this year. And it seems like a couple teams that are the trend of that. One of them is the Eagles that people are down on right now. Another one, though, is the Kansas City Chiefs. So they're not projected for a mass amount of ownership. And I think they could come in even lower than that. So Patrick Mahomes, Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce double stack.
All right, I like it. Yeah, I was leaving the Eagles, but I feel like I often do that, and then I'm like, why didn't I just pick? Like that's probably the actually the stack that I have the most interest in. It's just like I never want to choose the most obvious stack, which is this week. I'd say it's the Eagles.
All right, so let's go ahead now and just look at some of the Saturday night slate. And we don't have to spend a mass amount of time on this or anything. We're not going to do 30 minutes or anything, but we could just take 10 minutes to pull up the Sims here, and I'll run some of my computer here as well while we're talking through it. But Mike, do you have Sims built out for this Saturday night game?
I was going to run them now. I'll show you.
Perfect. Yeah. So we'll run them right on screen. We've got Saturday
that way you
night.
can see the speed that this actually works in.
Yeah, go and do 10,000 lineups, Mike Lawrence. That's not 10,000. Not a big deal, but yeah, build out 10,000 lineups for tonight. So we're just getting a bigger sample size of the lineups to look at. And there are a couple of different packages we have on the Sims, and it depends how many lineups you guys play. There's different ones I would recommend for you, but you could either build up to 500 lineups in the Sims, or you could do up to 10,000 lineups. So 500 lineups is the base package. 10,000 lineups is the max package. So if you're somebody 150 enters, I think 10,000, the max package is the one for you. But if you're somebody who is playing, like 20 lineups, single entry, stuff like that, then you're good with the 500. So what we're going to look at here is we're going to simulate out the slate, and then we'll look at what we're getting to as far as results. Neil, I know you did some content for the Saturday game earlier. Was there anything that you noticed you were getting to the most, at least as far as like the captains were concerned? Because after Mike sims these out here, I think we should sort by just the captains, and we'll start by seeing which captains we get the most of.
Yeah, CD Lamb was my highest exposed player on both DraftKings and FanDuel. Really stands out, and that's not a huge surprise. I mean, obviously the Lions defense is a lot worse than the Cowboys defense. CD Lamb, probably clearly one of the best players on the slate. So I was getting to a ton of CD Lamb. I was surprised by how many times I was getting like 3 receivers from a team without the quarterback. Was something that I was getting a lot, primarily the Lions receivers. I was getting a lot of like Sam Laporta with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams, and no Jared Goff in those lineups. So that was something that kind of stood out to me, that I was getting a lot of kind of unique lineups in that sense. Yeah, I'd say those are the biggest things.
And one thing that I wanted to touch on, and then I see Mike's got these lineups built out here, is that somebody had asked in the chat. It was Colin Mahone was asking us, what is our favorite run back for Chief stacks? None really. My Chief stacks don't really have run backs in them, which I'm fine with, by the way. I don't think I need to force run backs into those lineups. But let's see if we could pull up on screen the Sims again, Mike. I want to see which captains we have the most exposure to. So just sort by, go to position, filter, and then you can just put in C for captain, and or CPT, either that is fine. And you'll see here the players that we're getting to the most of exposure at the captain spot. And then over here, we see their projected ownership from the contest generator as well. So 4 players that we're primarily getting exposure to in the captain spot. CD Lamb makes sense. He's going to be the most popular. Amon-Ra St. Brown also makes sense. A little bit of popularity. Dak Prescott, but as a contrarian option, we're also getting to Sam Laporta. So if you guys are building a lineup, or you want to be, just going with some of the lineups that are going to be projected for some of the more fantasy points, still positive ROI, but are also going to be a little more popular. Looks like CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown, your guys there. What do you think of Sam Laporta as a contrarian captain, considering that we're about double the field to him with that?
Yeah, I mean, it makes it. What do you have, a 3 touchdown game like 2 weeks ago before I think he dudded out last game? Yeah, Sam Laporta makes a lot of sense. Just a guy who could rack up some PPR points, maybe score a touchdown or two. I like it. If he's not going to get a ton of ownership, seems like a nice spot.
Yeah, so Sam Laporta is somebody there that we're getting to. An underweight to, we are slightly underweight to Dak Prescott, although more or less even with the field. Tony Pollard is one that we have a pretty big underweight stance to. Tony Pollard projected there for 11% ownership, so about half the field there on Tony Pollard. Let's see. Can you keep scrolling down, Mike? I want to see if there's any like super contrarian guys there. There is. Oh, it looks like we do have a couple of Deuce Vaughn lineups showed up there. So if you want to build like a superstars and scrubs lineup, looks like we have a Deuce Vaughn lineup there, and that's probably 2 Deuce Vaughn lineups for our top 150. So that's the guy who, if you're taking like a punt on somebody who the field is not playing at all, Deuce Vaughn is showing up in some of those lineups. Anything else you're noticing from the captain exposures? If not, Neil, we can look at some of the flex.
Yeah, I mean, Deuce Vaughn kind of interesting. I was noticing that earlier when I was running. I was like, well, why are we getting to Deuce Vaughn? And then I remembered Rico Dowdle is out this week. So even though Deuce Vaughn has not been involved at all, Rico Dowdle has been, playing, reasonable number of snaps. I guess just 16% last week, but in general, he's been fairly involved for the Cowboys. So who knows? Maybe Deuce Vaughn comes in and plays an actual role, or maybe they just roll with Tony Pollard. Hard to really know what the Cowboys are going to do, but I do think Deuce Vaughn is interesting. But yeah, I think we can look at our exposures to the flex.
All right, so let's go ahead and look at the flex spots. And then also, we had somebody in the chat, it was Ryan Rennebaum, asked for FanDuel lineups. So while we're doing this, I have FanDuel lineups running on my computer over here. So after we're done talking about DraftKings, I could also give out what some of the FanDuel results are and some of the players I'm getting to most of from a FanDuel standpoint. So don't worry, we'll be hitting on both of those. And yeah, let's go ahead and look now at some of the flex exposures for DK. And yeah, no real surprise. Lots of Dak Prescott. And, yeah, our data is really liking Deuce Vaughn as a contrarian option here, Neil. We got to, not a ton. There was only a couple of lineups with him in the captain spot, but look at this. Guy only projected for, what is that, 13% ownership. The screen's a little bit blurry looking at it through Zoom, but it looks like that says 13%. And he's nearly half of our lineups. Deuce Vaughn looks like the contrarian play of the slate in our data, Neil.
Yeah, my only concern would be that maybe the ownership comes up. And also there is some possibility that they don't really use him a ton. But with Rico Dowdle, he would make sense as the running back too that the Cowboys go to. They obviously have the fullback Lupke in there as well. But yeah, I think Deuce Vaughn, I think there's a wide range of outcomes for Deuce Vaughn. I think there's also, it's very difficult to predict to project ownership for a player like Deuce Vaughn, who he hasn't really been involved. Now he's probably going to have some involvement. We'll see what it ends up coming in at. But yeah, right now, I mean, he looks great. If he's going to come in that low owned, I would slam him into my lineups.
And let's see if we could keep looking here. We've got, as the other priorities in the flex spot, Jared Goff, Sam Laporta, Tony Pollard, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Can you actually sort to see who we're underweight to, Mike? So go to the leverage column all the way to the right, and let's sort by that and see who do we come in underweight to here in the Sims. We are underweight to David Montgomery. We are go back to the under-owned. I want to see who are we fading here? So underweight to David Montgomery. CeeDee Lamb, kind of to an extent. Part of that's because we're getting overweight to him in the captain spot. So more neutral to CeeDee Lamb. We're underweight to Josh Reynolds, underweight to Jahmyr Gibbs. So really not liking the Detroit running backs here, which I don't have an issue with. I don't think this is the best game script in the world for the Detroit running backs. I do think this sets up for them to be throwing the ball more. So my preferred way to get exposure to the lines is going to be from Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jared Goff, as opposed to the running backs. Negative game scripts. It's also gotten to be fairly hard to discern whether it's going to be Montgomery or Gibbs on any given slate. So for me, at least as far as those running backs are concerned, not ones that I'm really liking as much from the Lions side of the game. By the way, Mike, I've got lineups already built here for FanDuel on my computer, so don't sweat it. I'm just going to read out some of this right now, starting with for Ryan Rennebaum and everybody else who plays on FanDuel. This is the lineup that I have projected for the best overall ROI for FanDuel. It is Dak Prescott in the MVP spot with Sam Laporta, Deuce Vaughn, Tony Pollard, and then CeeDee Lamb in that lineup. So it is a 4-1 Cowboys onslaught stack there. And then if I go ahead and look at some of my MVP exposure for FanDuel, only 3 guys that I'm getting double-digit exposure to. That is Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Without the salary multiplier on FanDuel, it is much harder to look at it and get to some of those like crazy off-the-wall contrarian plays, because somebody like Deuce Vaughn, Neil, like there's almost no chance that he's the highest scoring player in the game. But if you did have to pick somebody who isn't Prescott, Lamb, or Amon-Ra St. Brown for the MVP spot on FanDuel, who is somebody that you think is most live to score the most fantasy points in the game? Or you could opt and say nobody.
I mean, Jared Goff is the obvious one outside of that group. If I'm choosing between that group, it would probably be either Jared Goff or Tony Pollard. Also pretty interesting against this Lions run defense with no Rico Dowdle. I think there is at least some possibility that he gets more work with Rico Dowdle, that they don't trust Deuce Vaughn in the same way that they trust Rico Dowdle as the running back too. So I think Tony Pollard makes sense as a MVP option on FanDuel also.
Yeah, and now if we go ahead and look at my lineups, what am I most inclined to go with here? Yeah, for FanDuel, I'm actually a little bit overweight to Sam Laporta, only project for 3% ownership in the MVP spot. So if we're considering game script, or we think the Lions are going to have to throw the football a little bit more, then yeah, Sam Laporta, 3% ownership in the MVP spot. That's a way that I could certainly see myself going. And then if I look at some of my flex exposures that I got to here on FanDuel, players I'm getting the most of: Dak Prescott, Jared Goff as the quarterbacks, and then the stud wide receivers as well: Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb. Really like the passing games on both sides of this game. And then once again, Deuce Vaughn only project for 6% ownership on FanDuel, and he ended up in 28.7% of my top lineups, Neil. So Deuce Vaughn looking like a good contrarian option on both sites. As far as who I'm underweight to, coming in underweight to David Montgomery, Jameson Williams, Jake Ferguson, most notably on FanDuel. Anything else you want to add about the Saturday night slate, or maybe anything about the Sunday main slate that maybe we missed on?
I think that we covered the Sunday main slate pretty well. I admittedly have not looked extremely closely at the Saturday night, so I've looked at it a little bit because I ran the lineup generator briefly. I want to reiterate that I think that we are assuming that Deuce Vaughn is going to step into that Rico Dowdle role, which I think that's fairly likely that they just put him in there. But I think that there is some possibility that they do just give Tony Pollard all of the run, because they haven't been using Deuce Vaughn. They clearly don't trust him in the same way or to the same extent as Rico Dowdle. So I think there's some possibility that it's just Tony Pollard getting like all of the run at running back. So something to consider. Maybe build some with Deuce Vaughn, where you're taking a shot on the guy who's likely going to have a good role. But then maybe consider some lineups that omit him and use Tony Pollard and assume that Pollard is just the guy for Dallas.
All right, guys, that is going to do it for us. Thank you very much for watching. If you've not done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Have a great week 17. We're going to have tomorrow night all our NFL content. Right? We got the NFL deep dive live before locks. We got the 3-hour block leading up to the start of the slate. And then, of course, Sunday night, we're going to be having Neil and our old pal Emac doing the NFL Showdown live before lock for Sunday Night Football. So, guys, good luck with your week. Have a great weekend. Happy New Year as well. See you back here next week.
Go Birds.